I need your music. Thank you. Music.
It's right there.
Music.
It's there.
That's why I said thank you.
Okay.
What do you not get?
What do you asking me for?
I said I thank you for your music.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Stop. Thank you. No, you're mean. You're a mean child. You're a mean child. Sure. Yes, I see. I knew yes. Thank you.
I'm writing this down right now.
What?
I'm so sorry. I meant to do that for you. I'm writing it down right now.
I just like dashed around while I was like, way too much for me.
What?
I'll just pretend like I didn't find this. What is it? It's my books. I just all my books. Good job, $5. Yeah.
I'll take it. It's lucky with your purse.
Oh yeah, we're learning about the Tower of Babel.
Ladies from Trinity, is it over? Yes, back on the Trinity. You guys all stand up.
Why is it?
And
Push it, Daniel. Push it.
okay.
Not my knees.
All right, my friends. I'm gonna open us in prayer and we'll get started. Right, God, I thank you so much for this morning. Thank you for each person that you brought here this service, God. I'm just so grateful we can come here and just worship your name. Just give you our praise and all our attention, Lord. Just help us to put all of our focus on you right now in this moment. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. And holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. And I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone. And I will not be shaken, and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone. And I will not be shaken. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. I could just sit, I could just sit and wait for all your goodness. Hope to feel your presence. I could just stay, I could just stay where I am. Hope to feel you, hope to feel something again. And I can hold on, I can hold on to what I never let you change me from the inside. I could be safe, I could be safe here in your arms and never leave for Never let these walls down, but you have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you lead me, Lord. Yes, you have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you lead me, Lord. Where you lead me, Lord. Where you lead me, Lord. Sing, I can hold on, and I can hold on. I can hold on to who I am and never let you change me from the inside. And I can be safe. I can be safe here in your arms and never leave. I'll never let these walls down. But you have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you lead me, Lord. Yes, you have called me higher. You have called me deeper, and I'll go where you lead me, Lord. You lead me, Lord. And I will be yours. I will be yours for all my life. And I will be yours, God. I will be yours for all my life. And I will be yours, so I will be yours for all my life. So that your mercy light the path before me. And I will be yours, Lord. I will be yours for all my life. So let your mercy light the path before me. 'Cause you have called me higher. You have called me deeper. And I'll go where you lead me, Lord. Yes, you have called me higher. You have called me deeper. I'll go where you lead me, Lord. 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 You lead me, Lord. Would you guys stand with me for the last song, please? Take these hands. I know they're empty, but with you they can be used for beauty in your perfect plan. All I am is yours. Take these feet. I know they're simple, but you use the weak. You use the humble, so please use me. All I am is yours. I give you all my life. I'm letting you go. A living sacrifice. No longer my own. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. I give you everything. To you I belong. Every beat of my heart, the breath in my lungs. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. And take this heart, set it on fire, shining in the dark. I wanna tell the world of who you are. All I am is yours. Sing it again. Take this heart. And take this heart, set it on fire, shining in the dark. I wanna tell the world of who you are. All I am is yours. give you everything. To you I belong. Every beat of my heart, the breath in my lungs. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. I lift my hands up, God, I surrender. All that I am for your glory, your honor, your fame. I lift my hands up, God, I surrender to you. Sing that again, I lift my hands. I lift my hands up, God, I surrender. All that I am for your glory, your honor, your fame. I lift my hands up, God, I surrender to you. I give you all my life, I'm letting it go, a living sacrifice, no longer my own. All I am is yours, all I am is yours. I give you everything, to you I belong. Every beat of my heart, the breath in my lungs. All I am is yours, all I am is yours. 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 God, you are so amazing, Lord. We do give you our lives in this time. And as always, please continue to speak through Daniel. Thank you for always speaking through him and to us, and just open our ears and our hearts, our brains, just, to understand more about you and your people, God. Give you this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Lexi.
Do we need the Bible when Daniel just
I know, right?
on the screen?
I
Hey,
said that
you
first.
know what? It's good to have it in your hands. It's
That's what I thought.
practice. Because, when you're at home alone and you want to study the Bible, I won't be there with PowerPoint slides.
I'm sorry, but there aren't any
You can
Bibles
just
around
text
the
us
house.
PowerPoint slide, right?
Yeah, no. But the flip side of that is, if you guys want to read back a verse, I'm not going to push back the slides just because you want to read back a verse. You can read back a verse very easily, though. You want to read forward a verse? Go for it. It's in your hands. You can do it. If you just look at the screen, you have to stay in the music.
I can do
You're allowed to do it. True. True story. All right, guys. Open up those Bibles to Genesis 11.
It's kind of dark. Okay. It's not dark.
Okay, dog. Then remember last week we did Genesis 9 and 10. Do you remember 9 and 10? Yes. Genesis 9 and 10. Genesis 9 and 10. Hi, Samara.
This is 9, 10.
You may want to grab a blue chair before you come over. I think you're out of normals.
There's a normal chair right here.
That's true. If you want to sit next to Wes, then you can have one.
Please don't.
Or everyone could scoot down one. It's also an option. Yes.
Talks about the family tree.
That was 10. We did talk about the family tree in 10. Anybody else? Remember anything from 9, perhaps? I know it wasn't a whole lot of plot. It was conversation. It's a little hard to remember all the details. Yes.
God's promise to never flood the world.
Yes. Well, I might want to qualify that statement. Never destroy the earth with a flood. The world does see floods still, but it's never going to be another earth-covering flood, which is good. I'm glad of that. Because floods that are smaller than covering the entire earth, you can run from. You just drive away really fast.
Okay. Sure.
Sure. Anybody else? Anyone else remember anything from chapter 9, chapter 10? Nothing? Weston does because he's here last service. We spilled the beans. Weston, give us one thing from last service you recall.
Don't murder.
Don't murder. That was from last week.
But nobody.
But no one was murdered, which is good. This is the best situation in which to be told not to murder.
Don't murder, but I mean,
Because he issued the punishment for murder, meaning someday someone was going to murder. Yeah. You issued the punishment. Does anyone remember what the punishment for murder was? Instituted by God?
Death.
Thanks for raising your hand there, Hunter. It was
You're
good. It's good show. Good job. Hey, Jonathan, since you got your hand up, you want to say something?
Death.
Oh, good job. You said the one word death. Well done. So yeah, death was the punishment for murder. It was not the punishment for killing, though. We talked about that last week, how there was a distinction between the hateful, intentional killing and the accidental whoops. I was in the kitchen with a knife, and you were behind me, and I didn't hear you come in. And I turned around, and now my knife is inside of you. I'm so sorry. That wasn't murder. That was an accident. So God said that the punishment for murder was death, but not just plain old killing. What else happened last week? Can you remember? We saw the family trees. Does anyone remember what the family tree looked like?
No.
I know. So like, how could you know? It was a 3-branch family tree we looked at last week. Branching out from Noah was his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and they created the 3 main DNA branches on the human family tree. And we've actually backed this up with good science to show that the DNA of humanity has 3 main branches. And those branches all go back to a common point, which would be Noah and his wife. All right, so now we're into chapter 11. What we saw in chapter 10 was this forward-looking, huge future, like, zoom-out view, where you look way into the future and you see hundreds of years of stuff happening. Now we're going to zoom back in chapter 11 and look at something during the beginning of that giant period. 10 said everyone spread out eventually. 11 says, wait a second, before that happened, right before, when everyone was still all smushed together in one spot, this happened. So here we go, chapter 11. Hey, Wes, you get to read the same verses twice the same day. That's crazy. You want to read us verses 1 and 2? Go for it, man.
At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. As the people migrated east, they found Cain in the land of Babylonia and settled there.
Okay, so why would everyone speak the same language at this point in time? How could that be? Why would that be?
Because everyone, because Noah's sons and all that spoke the same language.
But why would everyone speak the same language?
Because they're all relatives.
That's it right there. They're all relatives. They didn't get off the ark and then say hi to the people who hung onto a log throughout the flood and survived. They got off the ark and they were it. They were the only ones. So they had kids, their kids had kids, cousins and second cousins married and had kids, and eventually you've got lots of people. We're like 80-ish more years after the flood at this point when we get to chapter 11. So there's been a few generations so far. Based on the ones that are recorded, generation gaps were about 30 years apart. So we're 3 to 4 generations down the line by the time we get to chapter 11. So the family has grown pretty substantially since then. Weird part, though, to mention here, where it says migrated to the east. Some of your Bibles may actually say from the east, and that's because the word east in the Hebrew is very certain. It's not a mix-up. It's very clear. We know exactly what the word east is, but the connective words over here, not that clear. And so in the Hebrew, we're not sure if it literally says moving towards the east or coming from the east. Oh, I was just doing left and right. Like, yeah, you're right. That's a good point. No, that's in real outside this building terms. That's east. Yeah, because that's south. Because that's north.
Oh.
Yeah. When you walk out the front of the church, is the sun
Oh,
setting
yeah,
there or
it's
rising
wrong.
there?
That's
That's west. Yeah. So
That's
so when I said east, I was right.
you're wrong.
I
So
was
what
right.
about for west?
I said
Why
two.
not? Why not?
I guessed anyways. I just happened to be right. Okay, so we don't know if it's to the east, from the east. It doesn't really matter. Here's your map for today. Here's Mount Ararat. This is where the ark landed, and here's the land of Babylon. And this is the supposed, and I heavily emphasize supposed, the supposed site of where the Tower of Babel was. So you can see it's almost directly south, like about as due south as you could possibly get. And since it says they went east or came from the east to get here, that means when they left the ark, they didn't go straight south. They went this way, or they went that way, and then they went that way, or they went that way. Either way, because that's ridiculous how crazy that is, they went back the direction they came, kind of, sort of. So either they went down right and then back left, or they went down left and then back right. But they ended up due south from where they started, in the end. But a lot of time's passed. Remember, this is several generations. But the weird part is they're all together. Why is that weird? Why would that be weird to all stay together as one family? I'm not calling on him just yet, because he was here last service. He's gonna know every answer, guys. He's a pretty good listener. There wasn't many distractions for service. There's like 3 kids here, so he's really got this. Can anyone puzzle this out with me? Does anyone remember anything from last week's chapter? God gave them a command twice. It was the first thing he said and the last thing he said. Yes? Spread out, repopulate the earth. It was the first thing God said and the last thing God said. He opened the conversation and closed it with that command. Spread out, repopulate the earth. Now, what is basically the only way you could not do that? Stay together. That's the only kind of disobedience there is for the only command of what to do that God gave them. That's it. Like, maybe not have kids, I guess, could be like the one other way to disobey. Like, don't have kids. But they weren't breaking that one. They were having kids. Yeah. Say one more time. Like, literally just spread out, except individual one by one by one by one person. You're right. You could do it that way. That would also be akin to, like, death. Or die. Not everyone is cut out to, like, feed themselves off the land all of the time. And then, even if you survive to, like, the ripe old age of 100 and whatever, like, you're still going to die without kids because you're alone. So yeah, you're right. That would work. You would effectively kill off the human species. Like, we're just all gone now. So you're right. You could disobey God in a few ways. This is the only way where they feel like they're actually happy and disobeying God. Because, like, they have family, they get to share resources, they get to do all the happy fun things, but also not do what God asked for. He was hoping that as they grew, and there were big enough chunks where you could go survive on your own in this little piece of the family, that you would go make your own village, you would start your own little piece. And, like, you don't have to spread out 50 miles from every piece. Like, if you're 5 people and they're 5 people, maybe you just live, like, down the road from each other. And that's fine, but then the next generation, now there's twice as many or 3 times as many people, and you can spread out a little more. And then there's the next generation, and you can spread out a little more. It doesn't have to happen all at once. It's not like you have to get off the ark and wave bye. Like, all right, bye, Shem. I'll never see you again. Like, you just kind of do it organically. But at this point, we've already gone 4 generations, and it's all still one group. There's no spreading. So, minor rebellion, not huge, but it's going to get worse. It's not the end of the rebellion. So real quick, just wanted to show you guys. Oh wait, no, that's after this verse. We'll do an animation after this verse. Okay. You got this one. 3 and 4.
Let's make bricks and harden them to fire. In this region, bricks were used instead of stone. Tar was used for wood.
Mortar. It's the stuff that goes in between the bricks, like the cement.
Then they said, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves, with a tower that reached into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world."
Okay, so tar here is the same root word we would use for asphalt. So it's the black stuff in between the little rocks that make up our roads. And the ideal quality of tar is that it is just the slightest bit mushy. It gives just this little, almost unnoticeable amount. And so when you build a giant tall building out of it, you think like, well, that's not good, that'll squish. But it actually works as a shock absorber. So that earthquakes and, you stomping around on the top floor doesn't just make things vibrate and shake all the way down. It actually has like that tiniest amount of give. It's like the difference between honey and water. This is the water to the cement's honey. It has just that little bit of give. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, when it's really hot outside, like really hot, and you touch the ground and it burns. If you have like a stick, you can actually poke it, and it will like just like you can stick it in far enough and pull it up, and there's a little bit of asphalt on the stick.
Yeah. You heat up tar and it becomes pourable if you just make it hot enough. And so that's how you do it, is you'd actually get it hot in a fire, pour it on the bricks and like slide it on, and then you let it dry once the next brick's on top. And as it cools, it turns solid again. So it's like a heat activated glue. It's like hot glue for buildings. Anyways, so they make bricks, they build this giant tower, and this is how the story goes. Now, this story in the Bible is incredibly short. I mean, the next slide we're going to do is like the last part of the story. Like, it's really, really short. But the Tower of Babel is famous, crazy famous story. And if you ever listened to like an audiobook or a radio show or read a book on it or watched a movie on it, like there's extra bits usually thrown into the story, and they're not in the Bible. And the extra bits aren't completely invented, completely made up. They actually come from a different book. There was a guy alive around the time of Jesus. So just to give you the quick timeline, this is like 4,000 years ago. Jesus is like 2,000 years ago, roughly. So around the time of Jesus, like 2,000 years ago, there's a guy named Josephus. And Josephus is a historian. He literally wrote a history book, just the same as like what you would have in your history class. Okay? But he wrote it 2,000 years ago. So like, it's a guy from history writing a book about history. Now, his history book did what a lot of your history books do. He reaches as far back as he knows, and he covers the furthest back event he knows, and then he just slowly covers all the events leading up to his day, and then he covers in great detail the things that are actually happening in his day. So he actually covers the stuff that happens with Jesus. He's a Jew who doesn't believe in Jesus and still covers like the news, the current events of what was happening when Jesus was doing his public ministry and Christianity was getting started. But some of his earliest pages are actually this far back. They go back to this time. And 2,000 years ago, he had written records we don't have now. Paper doesn't last forever. You don't copy it down, it just disintegrates eventually. And so he actually had written works describing for him some of this stuff, and then he copies it into his history book. So some of the stuff that we have in our like stories of the Tower of Babel are not even in the Bible. They're in Josephus's book about the same event. And so some of the stuff he adds, we don't know if it's true. We can't verify it and double check it like we can with the Bible. But it seems true. It matches up with what the Bible says. It doesn't contradict the Bible. So we use it to kind of flesh out the story. And we just kind of have to hope it's right, and it doesn't change a lot. It just gives more color to the story. So one of the things about this, which is really cool, some of your Bibles will say a tower that reaches into the heavens. And some of their Bibles will say sky, like this one. So some translators lean to heaven, some translators lean to sky. Why? Well, Hebrew has one word for both. The word for heaven is the word for sky. It's the same word. So you have to lean on context in the sentence to figure out, like, well, what the heck are they talking about? Are they talking about, like, angels and God and, you know, heaven? Or are they talking about, like, birds and dragonflies and clouds? Sky. What are they talking about? Then we'll translate it to heaven or we'll translate it to sky appropriately. No one was really sure for a while, and then you see Josephus describing exactly what was going on here. He was saying that the people didn't want to get punished by God ever again and then get wiped out like they just went through in the flood. And so their goal with the tower was to build a tower tall enough that if God floods the earth, they can just stand on top and be fine. That's the goal. So sky actually makes good sense. Like, not actually touch the sky, but like they weren't trying to get into heaven via a staircase. They were trying to get up above even the mountaintops via a tower. That's pretty crazy.
Why don't they just build like just back in a little bit? Didn't it say that the water rose 22 feet above the tall mountains? Why don't they just build a 23-foot tower
23 foot, yeah, there you go.
and put it on top of the tallest mountain?
That's what I thought. I thought, why not do that? They already know Ararat is like where the ark landed. Let's just go build one on Ararat. That'd be easy. Babylon is in a valley plain. Like, it is the lowest ground you can have, short of just going to the beach. It's a terrible place to build a tall structure to reach over a flood. Like, it makes no sense. But we're going to see that again and again. In the story, most of what they do makes no sense. Now, again, one of the pieces we get out of Josephus that's not here in the Bible is their leader at this point is not Noah. Their leader is a guy named Nimrod.
That's very
I know, right? Okay, now, funny story. Nimrod, the word, comes from this guy. Nimrod, you're such a dummy, Nimrod. Like, that comes from Bugs Bunny. So, which one do you think came first?
Bugs Bunny.
So, originally, Nimrod was the name of this dude who was the leader of the people. And the reason he became the leader was not because he was the oldest or the wisest. Like, that was easily Noah. This guy became leader because, according to Josephus, he was literally a giant. He's actually in the family tree of Goliath. He's just several hundred years before Goliath. Goliath comes later. So he's an actual giant living in a family of every human on the planet, like 80 to 120 people, maybe a few hundred if it's really an explosive population boom. And he's living in this group, and he is a literal giant. And so he's just like, I'm in charge. Don't like it? You can fight me. And so people were scared, and they're just like, okay, yeah, you're in charge. And he's the one leading all this. He's also the one, according to Josephus, that is starting up the worship of stars and constellations, and not the worship of God.
He's a weirdo.
He is basically,
Nimrod.
yes, a weirdo. So he instigates all this stuff, building the giant tower to the sky. Why? He's obsessed with the sky. Not following God. Well, he's probably going to flood us again. He knows! He literally knows disobeying God brings on wrath. Now, apparently, he doesn't care about the promise of God because God promised he's not going to flood them again. That whatever punishment comes in the future will not be a worldwide flood. God already promised this. So he's building a tower for kind of stupid reasons. But that's okay. It seems like most of what he's doing is pretty stupid. It all kind of fits. So Nimrod, not a great guy, not a great leader, not a great job they're doing, not a great task. But that's all digression. We'll move on. So this is about Ararat. I just want to show you guys, like, it's crazy tall. It's like one of the tallest mountains in the whole Middle East. It's one of the only peaks in the Middle East that gets snow. Like almost nowhere else gets consistent snow. Not Ararat gets consistent snow. And this is where the ark landed. And then it says it was multiple weeks before he actually saw other mountaintops poke up out of the floodwaters. So he's on top of the tallest mountain in the entire region, and the waters keep going down, and weeks go by before another mountain pokes up. And like this little peak over here is like the next tallest peak I can find on Google Earth, and it's still like thousands of feet shorter than Mount Ararat's peak. So yeah, it would take weeks for the next peaks to show up. Anyways, that was that. This is the supposed site, this next spot, for the Tower of Babel. And I do heavily emphasize supposed because the people who say this is the Tower of Babel's original site are the same scientists who think that the book of Genesis never actually happened. It's completely invented. It was written by Israelites when they were slaves here in Babylon, literally over 1,000 years, after it was actually written by Moses. So, no, the tower that's resting on this spot is actually well documented by Greek historians from just after the Babylonian era. And they saw the tower, they knew the tower. Alexander the Great literally dismantled the tower and then had plans to rebuild the tower, but he died before he could rebuild it. So like the tower that this site is from is a real tower. It was crazy tall. It was in the city of Babylon. All true stuff. But the Tower of Babel, mentioned in Genesis, was not finished, was not in the city of Babylon. It was in the Babylonian area. It was its own separate special thing. It never even got finished. And it was hundreds of years distant from this other tower. But the tower here was very impressive. Don't get me wrong. Crazy cool tower. You guys know what a ziggurat is? Okay, so ziggurat. Crazy big ziggurat. And then supposedly the top of it, according to the records, was a temple where every single brick was faced with a custom cut piece of lapis lazuli that had been mirror polished. Lapis lazuli is this brilliant blue color, somewhere between like the purple of your tank top and like the blue of his sweater jacket. That's what lapis lazuli is. It's like just barely turning towards purple, but very brilliant blue. And so supposedly they took every single brick on the top temple on top of a giant tall ziggurat, and every single brick had its own special rectangular cut piece of lapis lazuli stuck onto it. So the whole thing was glimmering, shining blue, just like brilliant blue. And you could see it from miles around, like the tallest structure in the entire area. So as you walk towards the city, you just see like, so like, it would have been cool, but it also wouldn't have like reached the sky. It wouldn't have like protected you from a flood. It was just a few hundred feet tall in an era where a two-story building was rare. Okay, so like at that point in history, two-story buildings were rare. A giant hundreds feet tall tower is crazy impressive. Tower of Babel, it is not. It is the Tower of Babylon, the city. Different. The word Babel, we'll get to in a second, it's stuck with the area. The mountain range, the bigger area was just known as the Chaldeans for a while, but eventually just got known as Babylon. Okay, your turn. 5 through 7.
look at the city and the town, people of the same. People are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing is set out to do would be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse people of different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other.
All right, so two kinds of rebellion. Remember, first off, not spreading out. Secondly, worshiping fake, made-up gods and building a tower to try and escape God's judgment, rather than just being obedient, being good, and not needing judgment in the first place. And yet, duh, God's gonna punish. Like, didn't they know that? Isn't that why they're building the tower? They know God punishes. But isn't he God too? Isn't he infinite and all powerful? It's like if you build a tower that's flood proof, is he going to be stupid enough to try and flood you? This is completely nonsensical. Like if you build a flood proof tower and you actually did it, let's say God really did have a limit on his flooding power, so he couldn't quite flood out your tower. Oh no. What couldn't he just strike you with lightning?
Yeah.
This is
Or
a
just
totally
like,
stupid idea, totally stupid errand. And yeah, for sure, God can punish right around their plans. And so what he does is really interesting. He doesn't punish them in a blow you up, strike you with lightning, fire from the sky sort of way. He punishes them in a way that pushes them back on the track of obedience. Because you got to know, in a big giant family like this with multiple family groups, it's not likely that every single individual wants to disobey God. Not every single person is going to be like, yeah, I don't want to obey God. Let's all stay together. Some people are just together because their family's there, and they don't want to leave their family. And that's not like an evil intent. So God is punishing them on the one hand, he's disciplining them, but that's the difference between a straight up punishment and a discipline. A straight up punishment is like, you didn't do your chores, you owe me $5. Discipline is like, you didn't do your chores, now you got to do those chores, and I'm giving you extra chores. So it's a teaching punishment. It pushes you to do the right thing as it causes you to not want to do it again next time. The you didn't do your chores, you owe me $5 makes you not want to do it next time, but it doesn't push you to do your chores in any way. It just makes you regret having disobeyed. And so if he's like, you didn't spread out, death! That would certainly keep you from disobeying next time, but it wouldn't push you to obey. You're dead! So God wasn't going to flood them for this disobedience. That's already been done. He already did that style of punishment. That was judgment. Now he's doing discipline. So their job was to spread out. What is his discipline? He's taking away something they prized, the ability to have one big family. And that probably hurts. But in the same process, he's also providing the push to get them to obey, to get them to spread out. And so he's leaving small families together, but the big family is being split up. Yeah.
So who is he speaking to?
Ooh, I love those kinds of questions. In the Old Testament, many readers for a long time thought the angels. And that makes some sense to some degree. But as you read through the New Testament, there are several examples where Jesus references back to a conversation. Now, not this one in particular. I can't say he references this one, but he references conversations in the Old Testament where it sounds like maybe God might be talking to the angels, and Jesus says, no, it was us talking to each other. And when he says it, he means literally the Trinity. So God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit talking within himself. Literally the impossible to understand process of God making up his own mind. That's so weird that he can have three personalities, three persons within himself, and he can have conversations within himself. That's wild stuff.
Lonely.
Well, I don't know if that's the right word, because lonely is such a human quality. But to a certain degree, whatever God has that's like our loneliness, yes. Because God says that's part of the reason he made humanity. Is not just so that he could have a relationship with us, but so that we could have a relationship with him. And so that we could not be lonely and he could not be lonely. We could know each other. Cool stuff. But that's besides what we're talking about today. So he says we're going to confuse the languages. They're all going to have to split up. And now it is your turn.
In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the land, and they stopped building the city. That is why the city is called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people of different languages
Now it's interesting, some of them left, but you know who stayed? Nimrod's family. Kid you not, if you go back 2 chapters to the list of where everyone went, you read the whole list, it tells you who goes to Babylon at first. And it says that Nimrod actually has like multiple cities in the area. But he's like trying to be king over multiple cities. And so he like keeps branches of his family in close-ish, even as they have to spread out a little. And he tries to be in charge of all of them. Not the best heart. Now the reason Nimrod means like dummy now is actually really funny. Nimrod for thousands of years had the same meaning. It meant you were a strong guy who was a good hunter. That's literally all it meant. Strong guy who was a good hunter. Okay, and it was a compliment. It was like what we might say now. I know it's slightly phased out, so you might not get this one. An Adonis. You guys ever heard the term Adonis? Okay. You ever heard Fabio?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Have you ever seen someone who's so muscly, you compare them to a famous person who is muscly?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like you might say, whoa, his body's like Schwarzenegger or something like that. Like you might reference a famous, like, he's bigger than The Rock. You know what I mean? Like you might say, okay, so like you go backwards in time, and that's always been a thing. That has always been a thing. You reference a famous, big, burly, ripped, muscular person to state how muscular and how ripped they were. So you go back in time enough, and it was a Greek guy called Adonis. Adonis was this crazy, attractive, super muscular guy. And so if someone was that, you would call them an Adonis. And like even older than Adonis was Nimrod. You would call someone a Nimrod if they were not only muscular, but also a good hunter. Thousands of years, it carried both connotations. And then one day, Bugs Bunny called Elmer Fudd a Nimrod. And when Bugs Bunny's writers wrote this line, they meant it as a slander because Elmer Fudd was a hunter, but he was not a good hunter, and he was not big and muscular. He was quite the opposite. But this is the hilarious thing. The writers for Bugs Bunny knew what it meant, and it was a joke, it was an insult, but they meant it in a very specific way. And then, everyone watching the cartoon, collectively, the whole culture of America, who didn't really use the word Nimrod anymore, watched a cartoon where a dopey character got called Nimrod. A dummy got called Nimrod. And collectively, our entire country started using Nimrod to mean you're a dummy. From Bugs Bunny. I kid you not. We changed the meaning of a word because Bugs Bunny. No one ever realized since that point on that it was like a word for hunter. No one from that point on ever realized it meant strong and big and muscular. They all thought it meant dummy. And to this day, if you say Nimrod, they all think it means dummy. That's literally how we think the word sounds to us because it's how we were raised using it. But for thousands of years before Bugs Bunny, it meant a big, strong hunter guy. Way to go, Bugs Bunny. All right, so Babel, root word, it means to talk, but no one understands. That's literally it. It means speaking nonsense. It's a similar root to the word that we get Bible from, which is the word for words. Bible means words. The word, specifically, like the word of God. So, similar roots, except one means like the word, and the other one means a bunch of nonsense words. So they sound similar, Bible, Babel. But that's because they actually do have a shared origin for their meaning. All right, now move on. Now, back in Genesis 5, this was several weeks ago, I showed you guys this timeline. This starts with Adam at creation on the left and goes 2,000 years over here to the 3/4-ish point on the Ice Age. And it's 10 generations from Adam to Noah. So don't count Cain and Abel. They're Adam's kids, but they're not part of the family line that goes down to Noah. So you go Adam, Seth, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's 10 generations. And Noah's not dead here at the end of 2,000 years. He actually gets past this onto the next slide. So I slid it all over. This one doesn't reset perfectly 2,000 years later. It resets at the flood. So the flood is the first pixel. And then it's 2,000 years. But notice that 10 generations doesn't get you very far. Last time, 10 generations covered over 2,000 years because of how stinking long everyone lived. They lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then you get on to the next slide, this is all after the flood, and you notice it starts dropping off. So Shem was born before the flood, right? And he lives after the flood. He lives 600 years to Noah's 950. That is shorter. But then the next kid, 400s, 400s, 200s, 200s, 100s. 10 generations is not getting you very far. In fact, some of these guys are dying before their dads. I mean, like, Eber, he's the dad of Peleg. And, like, Peleg dies first.
No inheritance.
Right? I mean, Eber outlives, look at this, guys. 1, 2, 3. Draw that line down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations. Eber outlives 6 generations. Okay, so count with me 6 generations, right? So you've got Abraham to Terah, that's dad, granddad, great-granddad, great-great-granddad, great-great-great-granddad, great-great-great-great-granddad. Did I get that wrong? Is it 4 greats?
Yeah, no, you missed.
Is it 5 greats? Dad, granddad, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4.
My
So
brain isn't
great, 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 great granddad outlived his great, 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 great grandkids. That's ridiculous. And that's just because every generation was losing lifespan as they went down. That's crazy. Now, another fun fact is if you draw the line down from Noah, he could just about, I gotta actually get this close, so it's a tiny line. There's Noah's death line here. Just misses Abram. He could have almost met the 10th generation. And he actually could have met the 9th. Terah was alive at the same time that Noah was alive. That's wild. 9 generations all alive together. And if you go back, check it out. Adam made it all the way down to Lamech, but not Noah. Adam made it down to the 9th generation, but not the 10th. It's the same in both. Isn't that crazy? So like you had, and this is why the population boom was so indescribably fast. You have 9 generations living simultaneously.
That's fun.
That is unheard of from this point on. As soon as you get to like Israel as a country time, everyone's on the 120 is the oldest you can get. Everyone's on, there's 3 generations at most alive together at once. 4 generations is really pushing it. Like you guys, some of you know your great-grandparents. I'll bet you there's no one you've ever met who's met their great-great-grandparents. Does that make sense? Like, it is ridiculous to get past 4. Past 4 is like too much. You could just barely pull it off. So like maybe if you all had a kid right when you were 18, and then like the furthest back generation lived for a very long time, you could just make it. But it's still really pushing it. And generally, if you go through multiple generations, it's a total lottery on how old you are when you have kids. It's not like every generation is going to have kids, boom, right out of the gate. It kind of ebbs and flows. So this is crazy how fast the population would explode like this, because you could have kids for decades, and then your kids could have kids for decades, and your kids could have kids for decades. So having 12 kids wasn't nuts, because they wouldn't all be living at your house at once. You only have like 3 or 4 in the house at the same time if you were going to space them out. Or you could have 30 kids and you really did have 12 in the house at once. But you actually ended up with like 30 by the time you were dead. Either way, crazy population boom. Crazy. Okay, also, yeah, Ice Age. Outlived here. Abraham experiencing the very tail end of the Ice Age. Noah getting to see the beginning of it.
Wait, who's alive right now? Who's Peleg or anything?
Yeah, so Ice Age right here. 270 blue stripe.
So do you think,
Tower of Babel right at the beginning of the Ice Age.
wait, so Peleg was alive during the Ice Age?
Yes, and the whole dispersion takes place during Peleg's generation. We know this because Peleg is not only given to us in years from Noah, but Peleg is also given to us as the marker for the same point in time when Babel and the tower were getting built.
So, like,
Peleg's birth marks the same year when all the building starts up.
so like mammoths are alive then and stuff?
Well, yeah, because think about it. You've got all the animals brought on the ark, so no major extinctions. God says bring them all on, save them all. Don't let any of them go extinct. They get off the ark,
Even mammoths?
even mammoths, all in the ark.
What about unicorns?
Find me one fossil of a unicorn and we'll talk. All right.
Get a
So
horse.
everything gets on the ark. Everything survives up to the ice age. The climate is still pretty good. It's moving towards the ice age. It's not like the year the ice age starts. It's like a light switch comes on. Like, oh, it's cold. No, it'd be gradual. It's like you move from the flood towards the ice age, and it's like slowly the global temperature average is just dropping. The poles are getting colder faster than the equator zone is. The equator zone never gets iced over, never gets frozen. Stays the equator. But as that's all forming, the animals are trying to spread out, and just about every reptile that moved too far north or too far south does go extinct. They get hit hard by the ice age. They don't survive. And so to this day, we don't find that many reptiles at the far north and the far south. Reptiles are pretty rare when you get really far north, really far south. They don't live there because it's really hard to live there. It's really hard as a full-blooded animal to live where there's ice. That's just natural. But more of them went extinct in the ice age than anything else because cold-bloodedness is a bigger problem in an ice age than warm-bloodedness. You just survive colder climates as a warm-blooded animal. So we have a lot more extinct reptiles, aka dinosaurs, because of the ice age. Yeah.
What about the dragons?
What about the dragons? I don't think dragons and dinosaurs are anything different from each other. I think the stories about dragons are what mess up the whether or not dragons existed. I think if you strip out the fake bits in the stories, dragons did exist. They were just dinosaurs. And when you're that scared of an animal that's a giant lizard, like giant, it's like you make up some stuff. You add some bits. But there are winged dinosaurs. So a winged dragon doesn't seem far-fetched to me. It's just a dinosaur, not called a dinosaur. Remember, we invented the word dinosaur within the last 200 years. So before that, what did you call them?
Giant lizard.
What did you call a dinosaur when the word dinosaur didn't exist? You called it
Man-eating giant
dragon.
creature things.
So, do I think that all dragons could breathe fire? No. Do I think that giant, ridiculous, fat dragons could pick up off the ground with their wings and fly around magically?
Did you know that it's
No.
impossible for bees to
We
fly?
found the fossils of flying dragons. They're just called dinosaurs now. And they don't weigh as much as dragons like we draw them in books. They weighed what a thing would have to weigh to fly. So there is a scientific thread that runs through all the crazy, ridiculous legend that's out there. Yes. Just not necessarily the way we make them up to be. Because a lot of what we know about dragons are not from what we've found in history. A lot of what we know about dragons is from what we've written in books. Not true. The records we find about dragons dug up, like archaeological records, do actually paint the same exact story you would get if you didn't dig up any and you just dug up dinosaur fossils. The ancient peoples knew about dinosaurs. They knew about them. In fact, Babylon, the city that we mentioned, like not the one at the Tower of Babel time, but the one later with Nebuchadnezzar, the gates you would walk through have dinosaurs in all the mosaic tilework. Long-necked herbivores are just like all over the walls with the other animals. And none of the other animals are made up, fake, imaginary animals. Not a bunch of unicorns and junk on the walls. A bunch of ligers and, what's the other one? The chimera. And it's not made up animals. It's all real animals and dinosaurs are up on the walls. Like, they knew about dinosaurs. They'd seen dinosaurs. It's pretty cool. All right, moving on. Here we go. Here we're back to the map. We're going to add on 2 spots. A place called Ur, and a place called Haran. Also, in some old translations, it's Charan. There's a C on the beginning. Charan. Anyways, we're going to mention these 2 in some verses, so I stuck them on the map so you know what we're talking about. Go for it, Caleb.
This is the account
Of Terra.
is the account of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abraham.
Abraham later does get called Abraham, but at this point in the story, he's still Abram.
Father of Abram, Terah,
Nahor. Pronounce it how you like. Go for it.
and Haran. And Haran was the father of Lot. But Haran died in Ur of the
Chaldeans. That's that whole area down here where it's green. It's a big valley with mountains on either side.
the land of his birth. While his father Terah
still living. Meanwhile, Abram and Nahor was married.
Not each other.
Yeah.
They were brothers.
Alabama
They
100.
both got married. They're gonna tell you to who.
The name of Abram's wife was Sarai.
Doesn't matter. It's just the right person. It doesn't matter how you say it.
Sarai. And the name of Nahor's wife was
Milka.
Milcah.
Like the chocolate?
Yes, Milka.
Milcah was her sister. Milcah and her sister
Go with Iska. Iska's great.
Iscah Milcah and her sister Iscah were daughters of Nahor's brother Haran. But Sarai was unable to become pregnant and had no children.
Okay. Woo! So there's just an explanation of the family tree and the marriages. That's where it goes for you. Yes.
Bravo, encore.
People back then just make up random sounds and call them names like little kids.
That's what we do now.
Straight black.
Yeah, all of our names now are just made up sounds. Like Kevin. What does Kevin mean? It's just a sound.
It means a person who really
But
likes Starbucks.
most of our names are traditional. Not all names are.
But
But we
that's
take
Italian.
sounds and we smush them together and we just make a sound that sounds good to us. But originally, all the names came from a meaning, a root word. And so I don't know them all by heart, but you can actually look up the bulk of these Old Testament names and find there's actually meanings behind the names. And the parents name their kids to do with like the situation of their birth, like where they when they were born, to name them a blessing. Like I hope this really does come true for you. The name means like strong in the Lord, and they're naming them like in the hope that their kid will be strong in the Lord. So like names have meanings. Why they got that name does differ from kid to kid. But even our names now have meanings whether we know it or not. Some parents name their kids based on sound. Like, oh, I like the name John. John sounds good. Other parents are like, I wonder what John means. They look it up and they're like, oh, I love that meaning. I would name my child John.
It
And then they
means
name their kid John.
Jonathan or Johnny.
My
Short
point
for
is,
either.
parents get to pick. And yes, you can just pick random sounds. I'm sure sometimes that happens. Hand up was Caleb's.
I'm sure somebody named their child.
Do you know any what name?
I can. Let's not do it now because we need to finish. Last service, Sam ended early, so I'm going to try and do the same so I can meet up with him time-wise. But yeah, we can look it up after. If you guys want to look up any name after, we can just Google it. It's pretty easy. There's like a bajillion big name sites that tell you the names of these things. Or the meanings of these things. Okay, Jonathan.
Oh boy.
One day, Terah took his son, Abram, his daughter-in-law, Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and his grandson, Lot, his son, Aaron's child, and moved away from from the
Of the Chaldeans.
He was heading for the land of Canaan, but they stopped at Haran, and settled there. Terah lived for 205 years and died while still in Haran.
Okay, so Haran
Ron must be.
is up here, and is down here. Canaan, where they were headed, is actually over here. So if they're headed over here, and they start there, how'd they end up here?
They didn't have a compass.
They didn't have a life.
They didn't have a wife.
They got really, really drunk.
Think about this, though, guys. They're headed from point A to point B, and they end up over here off to the side. How might that have happened?
They don't have a map.
Okay, possible. Well, what?
They were all
They were all blondes.
You're blonde. They were all
Now
All right, guys.
That's right.
yeah, and it's
What is in the middle between this place and this place?
A desert.
Tower of Babel.
Also true. But no, a desert was the correct answer. I wouldn't want to walk from here to here. That sounds bad. Do you know what's in between here and here?
Sand.
A river.
That's
A
why
very-
you fast travel.
A very famous river. Does anyone know what river
The
is from?
Euphrates. It's the river of Babel.
He knows. It's the Euphrates. When you go from here to here, you walk along the Euphrates. It's some of the lushest land that there was back in that day.
Bring a boat.
So you would get to walk through nice, tree-filled, shady, like beautiful, lush countryside. Go get fresh water out of the Euphrates. Like this was a cush journey. This was nice. And then you get to Haran, and it's actually really nice up in there. This is like the mountain country where there's lots of like pasture land and lowlands in between the mountains. And like this is where the river starts, is the head of the river. So it like has all these little tiny rivers up in there. This is beautiful. So like they're on their way to a great place, and on the way they find another great place. And so that's where Terah stays. Terah just lives out his days up in Haran. He was supposed to go down here. He was just going to stay there instead then. And so they just live out their days up there. Terah lives there until the day he dies. Abram is actually going to be the one who's going to head down to here eventually, and we'll get to that in future chapters. Eventually. All right. So what's been the point of all this today? We started at the top talking about the Tower of Babel. We got to the middle where we look at all the generations and the decreasing lifespan, and then we see in the ending one of the family units doing the thing that God said, spread out. He said spread out, and then they're doing it. They were one of those families that didn't go that far at first, all the way down from Shem to Terah. They didn't really go that far. Do you guys notice how close was to the Tower of Babel? That was pretty close. So when God said spread out, not all of Shem's family just immediately obeyed and did it. Some, including Terah's branch of the family, didn't go that far. They just went kind of like downstream a little bit. But at some point, Terah wakes up and realizes, we're going to spread out. We need to do this. This is what God told us to do. Let's do it. So he puts out a plan. We're going to go way over to the coast on the other side of this continent area, the Middle East. We're going to go to the other side. We're going to go over to Canaan. Let's go. And he ends up in Haran, because that's like the easy road to get there. And he likes it so much he just stays. There's nothing wrong with going to Haran. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Unless God gave you a specific place to go. And so that's actually what we're going to see as we keep reading next week. God gives a specific place to Abram, not just staying in Haran. He's going to give him directions on where to go. All right. So what can we gather from this chapter? When you guys, that's a bummer. You should zip up your jacket, obviously.
My legs are cold.
But zip your legs in the jacket.
Yeah.
Oh, is the jacket
My
not big
legs
enough?
are too long.
Do it.
It won't
Sorry.
work.
Just
No one
do
can help
it.
you.
Lulu can.
It's a black hole of coldness. Okay. What we see in all of this, guys, is that when you guys, just like the people in our story, go off from God's plan, when you guys go off from God's plan, he has every right, and he is likely to discipline. To discipline. To get in your way, to keep you from continuing the wrong way, to maybe bop you back onto the right path. And I've found, and you can find it in other stories along with this one, that the bop onto the right path is going to be equal in force to the distance you got off the path. If you're, 5 feet off the path, he doesn't have to bump you very hard. If you're 5 miles off the path, it's going to take like a really big driver and a large swing and a huge bop and some follow through. And
Or 50 cal.
you'll soar a bit, and it's going to make you soar.
Oh,
So if you want to stay on God's path, keep your eyes peeled. Stay attentive for when God is disciplining you. Look for him putting unpleasantness into your path, and it's got to be him. And then when you see it, question everything you've been doing. Go back and go, is there any decisions I've made lately where I didn't check it with God first? Because what set up this whole family for failure was following a leader that wasn't checking in with God. They're following after this Nimrod character, and Nimrod is trying to worship stars and not the real God who made the stars. As he does this, he's not checking his plans with God. If he had said to God, God, I'm afraid of your punishments I want to build a safety plan. I want to build a safe room, a tower, something to save me from your punishments. And he was actually concerned and talked to God. God would have been able to reassure him, tell him exactly what would happen if he continues with a plan like that. But that's not what was going on. They had a leader who was not talking to God. And so us, ourselves, we are our own leader in a sense. We make our own decisions. And if we are making decisions and not checking with God, we're being a Nimrod.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? Like if you're not checking with God, you're being a Nimrod.
The good kind of that.
No, this is the bad kind.
I am a Nimrod.
The bad kind mean.
Thank you for checking. So do it. Take the discipline, whether it's the soft 5-foot correction or the ridiculously painful 5-mile correction, and realize God's doing it because he loves you. He's not just pushing you onto his path because he really likes it when you're on his path. He really hates it when you're not. He's pushing you onto his path because he knows it's going to hurt you less to stay there. He knows it's going to be better for you if you are there. Does that make sense? His path is the best place for you. So being there is the best thing for you. So disciplining you to get you back on it is love. It's kindness. If your Bible falls over again, you will be the Bible collector for today. Please don't do it anymore. Thank you. Okay. All right, that's literally it. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the chance to study it, that you've written all of these things down from thousands of years ago, just so we could have a window into what our past contained. Help us, Lord, to learn from people's mistakes like Nimrod, to follow the examples you've given us, and to avoid the examples that we know we shouldn't be following. Help us, Lord, most of all, though, to just wake up when we sense your discipline. Help us to have our eyes open and to notice when you're having to push us, when you're having to put barricades and obstacles in our path. Help us, Lord, to recognize that difficulty and to find our way back onto your path. And Lord, if it's possible, help us to check with you every time so we never find our way off the path in the first place. We're bad at that, Lord, so we need your help. Remind us to check with you. Help us to pray to you more. Help us to be in step with you at all times. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. I love you guys. If you got questions about names like Nahor or how to know if all the animals in the yard, whatever your question is, you're welcome to stick around and ask it.
I want to win. I'm not gonna win. I'm not gonna win.
Ow, I think it was the whole time. It was like
Yeah, who cares about winning? You should just buy everything. Like a winner.
that's the exact phone. Yeah, do not get the bean. You don't need
The
Oh, I guess I should just go home now.
My bike. I hope.
I have money in that one iced tea. My iced tea.
Sweat it. Bad. You'll need your caffeine.
Yeah, I have to like
Wait,
go
what?
there.
Oh, I just
But then again, I got my family real quick, so I haven't stopped.
Okay, then have fun with the bike. That's why I don't spend my time.
Hey Daniel, can I have a raspberry iced tea? No. What? But I have $1.
You just bought the last one.
Dang it.
I'll look around. I think that really was the last one.
Oh well.
See you later. Thanks for being here, Anne.